Hey everyone, Jonny here with some further developments, pun intended, on GameFreak's desire to make higher quality games. If you've been following the channel, you already know quite a bit about this, but there's even more to talk about now. Yeah, the Pokemon Company has a big, new solution for how to handle their release schedule, and if you aren't already aware, this isn't the first move they've made to tackle this issue. So before we dive into today's news, let's go through a brief overview of everything we know so far. That way, everyone can understand the impact of what's to come. Back in February of 2020, Nintendo absorbed GameFreak into their home offices. As far as we know, this was so resources and information can be shared more fluidly between the two collaborators when it came to game development, something GameFreak has knowingly struggled with beforehand as seen with Sword and Shield. A year after the move, in 2021, GameFreak outsourced the remake of Diamond and Pearl to another studio who had never made a video game before. This was presumably to allow for GameFreak's subsequent release, Pokemon Legends Arceus, to have more development time after COVID threw a wrench in this schedule. PLA's release also coincided with the move into Nintendo's headquarters, and allowing for a delay seems to even suggest that the Legends series is Nintendo and GameFreak's new collaborative baby. But we'll touch back on that later. Regardless, while GameFreak's Pokemon Legends Arceus released to mass praise and commercial success by fans, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl really dampened a lot of players with its lackluster effort. It was clear the game was crafted in a very short time span, and the decision to remain, faithful only angered players since remakes had historically been used as a way to bring old games up to modern standards. While the games were a commercial success for GameFreak and ILCA's collaboration, the critical reception has left a heavy scar on the face of the brand, and also on players' thirsts for remakes. In late 2022, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet released, just a few months after Pokemon Legends Arceus. 2 Pokemon games from GameFreak in 1 year? Yeah, this one had to be rushed, right? And rushed it was. Scarlet and Violet released as a buggy mess. The vocal backlash was so large and loud that Nintendo had to issue an official apology, promising to patch the game up in the future. Long story short, this patch took almost an entire year to release, and while there are still a few performance issues, most of the bugs and overall frame rate were ironed out thanks to the game's infamous memory leak being resolved. Today, the game is more or less what GameFreak envisioned for players to experience. It's just too bad they didn't wait the year to release the game anyways, especially since we already had our 2022 release of Pokemon Legends Arceus. Now, since Scarlet and Violet's release, the Pokemon Company has stated their desire for overhauling the current development structure for their products. Up until now, it's basically been one new mainline release a year, with every 3 or so years being a new generational release. 2021 and 2023 even saw the release of 3 mainline games within a 12-month period. Insane. All of this is done to keep Pokemon's most profitable sector going as strong as possible, their merchandise. Look, I love Pokemon and I want it to do well, but I don't think the games need to suffer these crazy schedules for the merch to sell. The merch will always sell anyways, and if you agree that 3 games a year is not a maintainable release schedule, or even that 1 game a year isn't, or 2 years, you'd be right. Most game studios release a new mainline title with a minimum of 3 years hiatus, and the Pokemon Company seems to finally agree this is the way to go in the games department. Not only with their statement about restructuring, but with a couple other things we've seen recently. First, fast forward to 2024, where we were treated to a grand teaser for Pokemon Legends Zeta. The teaser ends with the 2025 release date, meaning we finally get a year's gap for a mainline Pokemon release. Not only that, but there are a lot of signs hinting towards this game being a Switch 2 launch title. I've gone over all those reasons before, so feel free to check those out in my analysis videos after this, but the point remains that something clearly shifted for GameFreak and the Pokemon Company for them to finally take a year off releasing a product. This is considering Pokemon Legends Arceus was originally intended to be a 2021 release, not 2022. While having another Legends title solidifies it as a new, ongoing sub-series for the studio, the likelihood of this becoming a Switch 2 title only furthers my theory that Nintendo and GameFreak are working together on these Legends games, much more collaboratively than, say, new generational releases, or even standard remakes. If Nintendo sees potential in the sub-series, which I think we all agree they do and should, using Pokemon to sell their next big console will be a huge win for everyone involved. We get a quality game, GameFreak and Nintendo both get huge sales and critical recognition. That's the winning formula for longevity in any series, far removed from the constant backlash the new generational releases and safe remakes have been receiving despite their high sales. It's also worth noting that Palworld likely lit a fire beneath them, and before you say anything, I know many of you are thinking that Nintendo or the Pokemon Company doesn't care about Palworld, but I think you'd be missing some major points with that deduction. Palworld is only in early access, and it sold over 25 million copies in just 1 month. Guys, money is what talks to these companies. Yes, Pokemon has sold comparable numbers with their Switch titles, but Nintendo and the Pokemon Company are not stupid. 25 million sales doesn't happen by accident. They know that those 25 million sales are money on the table that they could have for themselves if they do something to outshine this release. They know that those 25 million people are people who are willing to look elsewhere for a creature collection experience. This is why competition is healthy. And for those of you who think Palworld has already fallen off because the player base has apparently declined a month after release, I'd kindly ask you to think about 2 things. 1, Palworld is still in early access and hasn't even had its full release yet. And 2, I can guarantee you that if there was a way to keep track of how many people were still playing a new Pokemon game a month after release, the decline would be either comparable or possibly even larger of a drop. Now, all that being said, we've arrived at GameFreak's latest solution to how they're going to handle their release schedule. Just last week, we got news of a brand new subsidiary called Pokemon Works becoming registered publicly. Apparently, the building the subsidiary was registered to is the same building as ILCA Inc. Yeah, that ILCA. The company that brought us Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Now, I get it. That dampens your excitement about the subsidiary. However, give me a moment to explain why this is a good thing and not a bad one. For one, don't forget, BDSP was conceptualized and released in a very brief time period, likely just to allow extra time for Legends Arceus because of COVID. For 2, given the time frame of development, ILCA showed a lot of competence in BDSP's innate quality. The game runs well. There was quite a bit of graphical flair even with this simple art style, and a lot of decisions made about what could be included or couldn't wasn't actually their fault. It was Junichi Masuda's of Game Freak, as he was the lead director and supervisor. You can even see ILCA had grander visions of what BDSP would look like if given the time and resources they wanted for it, based on their concept arts for the game, only to seemingly be shot down by Masuda and co., or possibly because of the supremely tight schedule. Now, the likelihood of a pandemic shutting the world around again soon is slim, so assuming no wrench is thrown into development like last time, and the competence of how well put together BDSP was, well, at least for the game it was allowed to be, given the circumstances, I think ILCA can put out a good Pokemon game under a different set of rules. That means it seems that ILCA and possibly some other devs from Pokemon Works will be in charge of full mainline releases that bridge the gaps between Game Freak's releases. So, to make it very clear, there are 3 restructuring factors at play, each one working in tandem to promise an exciting jump in quality for the Pokemon franchise. Number 1, mainline releases are now allowed a year's hiatus. This likely also includes allowing a gap after a year dedicated to DLC, like what we're seeing between Scarlet and Violet and Legend Zeta. Number 2, Nintendo is working more closely with Game Freak to avoid what happened with their rocky transition to the Switch, as seen with Sword and Shield. Even if you don't believe in the theory that Legends is their new collaborative baby, there's no denying that moving Game Freak into Nintendo's headquarters is a power move to allow for easier sharing of resources and information. Number 3, Pokemon Works is a new subsidiary seemingly dedicated to filling some gaps between Game Freak's releases. I don't think they're going to deliver a product every year Game Freak can't release one, as we're not seeing one right now in 2024, but I do think they'll have the time and resources to make actual full games every now and again to keep us satiated between Game Freak's titles. They'll likely be remakes, but also probably less faithful than BDSP. What do you guys think of all this? Pour your heart out down in the comments and afterwards catch up with more of my videos, such as my analysis vids on Legend Zeta. The links are right in front of you. I've been Johto Jonny, and I'll catch you there.